Wilkerson reran some DNA using a new software program, and we do not have that case file yet from FDL. Mr. Myers was kind enough to provide us with the electronic data, but we don't have the case file itself. And it's certainly not going to affect the state's case in chief, but it may affect our cross-examination of Ms. Wilkerson. So when the state rests their examination of Ms. Wilkerson, it'll give us time to see if we received it.
Okay. Very good. All right, ready for the jury?
Sure.
Yes. Case bring them in, please.
For the record, when Ms. Young and I were riding up on the elevator from the first floor, two of the jurors got on the elevator when we were on it. We didn't have any conversation with them. We didn't acknowledge them. They didn't acknowledge us, but there were two of the jurors.
All right, thank you. All right, our jury back, please be seated. Very good. Good morning. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a relaxing weekend. If I could see by show of hands anyone who came into contact with information regarding this case since you left Friday evening, please raise your hand. I see no hands. Ms. Jensen, you may proceed.
State calls Jennifer Wilkerson.
Mr. Myers. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you give be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Need a minute to get set up?
Yes, please.
Good morning, ma'am. Can you state your name and spell your last name for us?
Jennifer Wilkerson, Wilkerson.
And were you employed?
I'm a crime laboratory analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in both the biology and crime scene sections.
And what does a crime laboratory analyst do in the biology section?
I examine items of evidence for the presence of body fluids like blood, semen, or saliva. I also will swab items for skin cells that were left behind from a person that touched or wore that item. I will then take that on and develop a DNA profile, and then I will compare that DNA profile to other DNA profiles in the case.
And how long have you been doing this?
I started at FDLE in January of 2006.
And what does a crime scene technician do for FDLE?
I am called to crime scenes to document and collect evidence. This is typically done through photographs and sketches to document. I will occasionally have to run a Faro scanner, which is a 3D laser scanner that takes a ton of measurements and pictures and overlays them so that in software you can take measurements within the crime scene. And then I will collect evidence and turn it into the lab for analysis.
And how long have you been doing the crime scene work?
I got out of training in 2013.
Do you have any specialized training to be a crime scene technician?
I completed the training program with FDLE. It was a little over a year, and I had a period of competencies, readings, written tests, and then I did a period of supervised casework under a trained analyst.
And what kind of education, training, or background do you have to be a crime laboratory analyst in the biology section?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the College of William and Mary. I have a master's degree in biomedical sciences from Eastern Virginia Medical School. I have a master's degree in forensic science from Virginia Commonwealth University, and I completed the one-year training program for serology and DNA testing with FDLE.
Is the FDLE crime lab accredited forensic lab?
Yes, it is.
Is it here in Pensacola?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what DNA is on just a basic level?
It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's your genetic blueprint. Kind of like the blueprint for your house is going to tell you where the kitchen is and the bedroom. DNA is ultimately going to tell you what color eyes you have, what color hair, how many fingers and toes, and you get half from your mother and half from your father.
Is DNA unique to every individual?
Yes, with the exception of identical twins.
Can you tell the jury the significance of DNA when it concerns family members?
Family members are harder to interpret DNA mixtures. When you have single profiles, unless they're an identical twin, they'll be different, and you can easily tell one person from the next. But when family members start combining, it gets harder to interpret the mixture. This is because you get half of your profile from your mother and half from your father. So for instance, if you had a DNA mixture, meaning more than one person's in there, from a mother and a father, and then you were trying to look to see if the child was there, they would look like they were there because mom and dad's DNA would count for all of their DNA as well. The further you go out in a family, so siblings will share less, cousins, uncles, aunts, they'll all share less, but the parent-child relationship is much more severe. Siblings can share more, actually. They could go either way, but parents will share half.
How do you develop a DNA profile?
First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cutting or swabbing. I'm going to put it in a tube and perform what's called an extraction. Which means I'm going to add heat and chemicals to break open the cells that lets the DNA out. It then undergoes quantitation. This just tells me how much DNA I have in the sample. And then undergoes amplification. This is just making millions of copies of the specific areas of the DNA I look at, and then gets put on a genetic analyzer, which gives me the DNA profile. And it looks like a graph with peaks on it. Those peaks are assigned numbers by a software. And so basically your DNA profile is just a big list of numbers.
Do you compare your findings to a known standard?
Yes.
Okay, and the known standard, is that typically a buccal swab?
Yes.
Do you do statistics to put in context your findings?
Yes.
Do you leave DNA on everything you touch?
No.
What kind of factors go into leaving DNA that's suitable for analysis?
It could be a lot of factors. Some people shed skin more than others, so they're more likely to leave DNA that they touched. Depending on whether you're sweaty, you might leave more because there's a fluid to transfer the DNA over. How long ago you washed your hands, what type of surface you're leaving the DNA on. If it's rougher, it may scrape more off. Things such as that can go into whether DNA is left behind or not. And then whether I can actually retrieve it could depend on if the person swabbed the exact area you touched, what kind of weather conditions it was stored in or the item was in. Obviously, heat and sun will denature it faster than if it was in cold temperatures, things such as that.
Is DNA fragile?
Yes.
What is transfer DNA?
Transfer DNA is essentially, if I was to touch this counter, DNA could transfer from my hand, my DNA could transfer from my hand to the counter. Then you end up with secondary and tertiary transfers. So a secondary DNA transfer would be if I touch the counter, and then this folder, and my DNA went from me to the counter, and then this folder touched the counter, then my DNA potentially could go from the counter to the folder. With each level of transfer, I would expect less DNA to transfer. So from me to the counter would be, a larger amount than from the counter back to the folder, but none of them should have a larger amount than what I have on my hand originally.
And so what you're saying is it degrades each time?
Yes, with each transfer, the amount of DNA should go down.
So in your time at FDLE, how many items have you processed for DNA?
I've run over 17,000 samples for DNA.
And how many profiles have you developed?
Probably at least half of those, about a half of those would have a profile, or maybe slightly more, because some of them we run as blanks as a control to make sure nothing's contaminated.
And how many comparisons have you done of those profiles?
Every time that I have a known and an unknown, I compare them. So most cases that I work have a comparison, or a good number of them.
Have you testified to your findings before?
Yes.
And does that include Escambia County?
Yes.
And how many times?
Around 160 times.
All right, you're here on the state of Florida versus Donald Hartung. When did you first get involved in this case?
I was first involved on July 31st, 2015. I was notified by the crime scene supervisor at FDLE that Escambia County Sheriff's Office had requested crime scene assistance with a homicide.
So you went out to the scene?
Yes, I did.
What did you do at the scene?
I ran our laser baro scanner that I described earlier. That was my only role at the crime scene, was to document it with that piece of equipment.
So you yourself didn't personally collect any of the evidence?
I did not.
All right. Back at the lab, what items did you initially receive at the lab?
I initially received swabs from an iPhone 6 in the case, swabs from the BlackBerry in a garbage can, swabs from a webcam from the garbage can, swabs from the back of Richard Smith's belt, swabs from the front left pocket of Richard Smith's pants, medical examiner kits from Voncile Smith, John Smith, and Richard Smith, swabs from a bracelet on the left wrist of Voncile Smith. I received buccal swabs from Donald Hartung and Tammy K. Duncan. I had a kitchen sink handle with suspected blood, a hammer from near the kitchen sink, swabs from the hammer, a Swiss Army fabric case from the kitchen counter, swabs from that Swiss Army fabric case, swabs of suspected blood from the Swiss Army fabric case, buccal swabs from Escambia County Sheriff's Office Sergeant Rusty Bjornson, swabs from the BlackBerry case from a garbage can, swabs from a webcam, swabs from a coffee table. That was it for the original evidence.
All right, so buccal swabs. What buccal swabs did you receive as standards in this case?
So I received swabs from Voncile Smith, Richard Smith, John Smith, Donald Hartung, Tammy Duncan, and Rusty Bjornson.
And with all of those buccal swabs, were you able to develop their DNA profile?
Yes.
All right. Let's start with the swabs on the iPhone 6 case. Were you able to develop a profile off of that?
Yes.
And what were your results there?
I developed a mixture of at least two. I assumed that Richard Smith was a donor. I was told that it was his phone, and his DNA was clearly on the phone as well. And there was a limited foreign DNA profile to him that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion.
Was Donald Hartung's DNA found on that?
No, he was excluded.
What about the swabs of the BlackBerry in the garbage?
I developed a mixture of at least two people again. Again, I assumed Richard. I was told that was his business phone. There was foreign alleles, but they were not interpretable.
Was Richard's DNA on there?
Yes, his DNA was on there.
And you said there was foreign DNA, but it was not interpretable?
Yes, so there was such a low amount that I couldn't include or exclude people based on what little bit was there.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, I did.
And how do you do that?
I use a color change test, and I rub the sample and get the staining on it, and then I add the chemicals, and if blood is present, it would turn pink.
And what did it test, positive or negative?
It was positive for blood, or gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
All right, next I want to turn to the hammer, Exhibit 22. Did you receive the hammer in this case?
Yes,
Okay. Did you also receive buckles or swabs of that hammer?
I did.
When you received the hammer, did you run your own swabs on the hammer?
I did.
Okay. I'm going to show you, there's some gloves there on the stand, and I'm going to show you what's been marked as 381. If you can take a minute, open it up and look at that for me. Okay, is that the hammer that you examined?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you did the swabs for yourself on the hammer, how did you do that? Where did you swab?
I divided the hammer up into parts. So the black area where the grip is, I did on one swab. The head, so the black area where the metal is up here, I did on a separate swab. And then I swabbed the yellow shaft area with a different swab. And then I actually took a little piece of filter paper and folded it up and tried to, or just kind of tried to shove it underneath where the hammer meets, the head meets the yellow shaft to see if there was anything inside that little crack that's right there. And that was a separate tube as well, run through DNA.
Were you able to develop, did you test it for blood?
I did.
Okay, and what were your results there?
The hammer gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
On all 4 of those spots?
I tested the 3 swabs, so the head, the yellow shaft, and the black grip. Yes, all of them were positive.
All right, let's start with the hammer handle. Did you develop a profile there?
Yes.
Okay, and what were your results?
I developed a profile as a mixture of at least 3. The major and minor could not be determined. Then I compared the known standards. Voncile Smith, Richard Smith, John Smith, and Donald Hartung were all included as possible contributors onto the handle.
What about the hammer head?
The head, I developed a mixture of at least 2 individuals. I developed a complete major DNA profile. The major DNA profile is the person who has the most DNA there. A minor would be the least. And the major matched John Smith. Then I also, the minor was insufficient for inclusion but was suitable for exclusion. Voncile and Richard could not be included or excluded to that. And Donald Hartung was excluded.
And what about the hammer shaft?
There I developed a mixture of at least 3. The major and minor could not be determined. Voncile, Richard, John, and Donald Hartung were included as possible contributors to that mixture.
And the area between the shaft and the head of the hammer?
I developed a mixture of at least 2. I got a complete major that matched John. The minor was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion, and Voncile and Richard could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
And you stated that you received swabs from the hammer from the sheriff's department?
Yes,
Okay, and did you test that for blood?
I did.
And what was the result there?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop
Excuse me, I couldn't hear her answer.
Could you repeat?
I'm sorry. Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
and did you develop a DNA profile there?
I did.
What were your results there?
I had a mixture of at least 3. I developed a partial major, which matched John Smith. And then Voncile, Richard, John, and Donald were all included into the mixture.
Can you tell the jury what an allele chart is for them?
Yes. The DNA profile, I said, is like a list of numbers. The different possible numbers you could be at any of the DNA markers, the scientific word for that is allele. So at any given DNA marker, you could be like maybe like a 12, 13. Those would be alleles. An allele chart just shows what profiles were developed or what those numbers are at each of the different DNA markers for an unknown or the known individuals in the case.
Do you do that on every item?
Yes, we put those into a chart and for the folder for every item.
All right, I'm going to show you states 384. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a chart that I created showing Exhibit 22A, which was the handle of the hammer swab that I took, as well as the known DNA profiles for Donald Hartung, Voncile Smith, Richard Smith, and John Smith.
And is that an accurate copy of the chart you created?
Yes.
I'd like to move in states 384.
Any objections?
No objection.
So admitted.
All right, Judge, if I could publish that real quick. after our warm-up. This is 384. Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at?
Yes. So the left column, locus is a fancy word for the area of the DNA that I look at. So these are the list of the DNA markers coming down here. Those are just their names. Then across the top is what profile you're looking at. So the first one is the swabbing I took of the hammer handle. And then you have Donald Hartung's DNA profile, Voncile Smith's, Richard Smith's, and John Smith's. And so then at each marker, what I do when I compare DNA profiles is I look at the unknown. So at this one, it'd be like 11, a 12, and a 13. Then you look to see if each person could be into that mixture. And that's how you determine if somebody is included or excluded. If enough of their DNA is there, then they would likely be included into the mixture. If they're missing large amounts of their DNA, then they would become excluded from the mixture.
In 2015, how many markers were you looking at?
15.
And what amplification kit was used?
It was called the Identifier Plus kit.
Okay, and what stat program?
We were using it's called Pop Stats. It was in the computer that the FBI provides us, and it made you would use combined probability of inclusion for mixtures or random match probability for knowns. And this just means that single sources, you would use a certain equation to say that this profile matched the other profile. And then for mixtures, you would use a different equation, and it showed that what the person could be included at, the statistic. So it gives you a weight to how good the match is or how good the inclusion is.
And have these changed since 2015?
Yes.
Okay, what are y'all using now?
Now we use a software program called STR-Mix that gives a statistic in the form of a likelihood ratio. And a likelihood ratio tells you how much more likely one scenario is over another scenario. So in the case of DNA results, how much more likely the DNA profile came from this person than an unknown person.
How many markers are y'all looking at now?
Now we look at 21.
And why did y'all change the system?
Essentially, just technology gets better over time. The additional markers provide additional information, and then the stats program allows you to use, the STR-Mix, the new program, allows you to use a lot more of the data that the other program did not, because it's much more advanced and takes in much more things into consideration.
How many times have you used this new technology?
I've run over 600 samples through STR-Mix.
Have you testified to your findings of these?
Yes.
Now, did you use this updated technology to rework any items in the case?
I did.
Okay. Let's start with the hammer that we just spoke about from the kitchen sink, near the kitchen sink. What did you rework there?
I reran the swab I took of the hammer handle, as well as the...
Judge, I'm sorry, could we approach for one moment?
Yes.
All right, we were talking about the rework that you did using this new technology, right?
Yes.
And I think we left off with the hammer near the kitchen sink. Which swabs of those did you rework?
I reworked the swabbing that I took of the handle, as well as the swabbing I took of the yellow shaft.
All right, let's start with the handle. What were your results here?
I developed a mixture consistent with 3 donors. And then I compared each of the individuals, and Voncile was included, and the observed mixed DNA profile was approximately 1.9 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Voncile and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. Richard was also included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 11 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. John was also included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 53 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from John and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals. And Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 130,000 times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Donald Hartung and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals.
All right. And what about the rework of the swab of the yellow shaft from the hammer?
There, I developed a mixture consistent with 3 donors. Richard was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard and 2 unrelated individuals than from 3 unrelated individuals.
And you're saying billion with a B?
Yes, billion, greater than 700 billion times. 700 billion is the cap that FDLE puts on statistics. That's the highest statistic I can report out. John was also included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from John and 2 unrelated people than 3 unrelated people. The comparison of the profiles for Voncile and Donald Hartung to the mixture failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion.
Does that mean there's not enough there?
Essentially, the statistic fell into what is called the inconclusive zone. The inconclusive zone was determined by FDLE through validations and performance checks so that I could have a range where there wouldn't possibly be a false inclusion or false exclusion. So for a 3-person mixture, our inconclusion zone is 0.0001 to 10,000. So if the statistic that's generated falls between those numbers, the person goes into the inconclusive zone. So they potentially, they do have a statistic associated with it, but we don't report it out because it could be slightly off. And we want to make sure if it's out of that range, we know the person is truly included or excluded.
All right. Did you rework the swabs that the Escambia County Sheriff's Office did of the hammer?
I did.
And what were your results there?
I developed a mixture consistent with 3 individuals. Voncile was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Voncile and 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated individuals. Richard was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 1.9 million times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard and 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated individuals. John was included as a possible contributor as well. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from John and 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated individuals. And Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 9.7 million times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Donald Hartung and 2 unrelated individuals than 3 unrelated individuals.
Did you receive swabs from the webcam from the garbage?
Yes.
And did you develop, what was your results there?
I developed very limited data. It was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. And Voncile, John, and Donald can either be included or excluded, where Richard was excluded.
And did you rework those?
I did.
And your results on the rework?
The rework actually gave me less markers than the original, and it was not interpretable.
Did you receive swabs from the back of Richard's belt?
Yes.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes, I did. And it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes.
And your results?
I developed a mixture of at least 2. I assumed Richard was on his own belt, as you would expect to find him. And I developed a foreign that was not interpretable. There was too little DNA to compare.
Did you receive swabs from the left pocket of Richard's pants?
Yes.
And your results there?
I developed a mixture of at least 2. Again, I assumed Richard would be on the pocket of his own pants. There was a foreign that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. And Voncile, John, and Donald Hartung were excluded.
Did you, in your medical examiner kit for Voncile, did you receive swabs from her fingernails?
I received her actual fingernail clippings and I swabbed them.
Okay, and did you develop anything foreign in those fingernail clippings?
I did not.
What about the fingernail clippings of Richard?
I did not develop anything foreign to Richard on his fingernails.
And what about John?
No, there was nothing foreign to John on his fingernails.
Did you receive swabs from the bracelet, the left wrist of Voncile?
Yes.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes.
And your result?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And your DNA analysis, did you find anything foreign?
No, there was nothing foreign to Voncile on her bracelet.
Did you receive the kitchen sink handle?
Yes.
And what did you do when you got that in?
I divided up the pieces of the handle that were there. I took there was like a silver screw that looked like it probably held it on. I swabbed that. I swabbed, there appeared to be suspected blood on the handle, so I swabbed that on a separate swab. And then I tried to swab the white area of the handle, avoiding the suspected blood.
And did you develop any DNA profiles there?
Yes.
And your results?
On the screw that appears to hold the handle on, that failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. And the DNA profile I developed was a mixture of at least 3. Because it was their kitchen sink handle, I assumed that Voncile, Richard, and John were already going to be on that handle. And then I developed a foreign. Escambia County Sheriff's Office, Sergeant Rusty Bjornson could not be excluded from that foreign, and therefore I did not compare it to anybody else.
Can you have DNA in your sweat?
Yes, there would probably be a fair amount.
What about the blood on the handle?
The suspected blood did give chemical indications for the presence of blood, and I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And what about the actual kitchen sink handle?
I have developed a mixture of at least 2. I developed a complete major that matched Voncile as well, and the minor was not interpretable.
Did you receive a Swiss Army fabric case from the kitchen counter?
Yes.
And what'd you do with that when you got it?
There appeared to be suspected blood on it, so I tested that, and it did give chemical indications for the presence of blood. So I took a swabbing of the suspected blood from the back corner. I also took a swabbing of the zippers to get into the pockets. I swabbed the inside of the opening of the pockets, and I swabbed the outside of the case trying to avoid the suspected blood.
All right, the zipper from the case, did you test that for blood?
Yes, I did, and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop a DNA profile there?
Yes.
What were your results there?
Assuming 2 donors to the zippers and that Richard is a donor, given that I was told that it was his case, a partial foreign was obtained, and that partial foreign matched Donald Hartung.
What about the inside pockets of the case?
There I developed a mixture of at least 3. Again, I assumed Richard was one of those contributors. The foreign results were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and John could not be included or excluded, and Donald Hartung was excluded.
What about the outside of the case swab?
That gave chemical indications for the presence of blood, and then I developed a mixture of at least 3 individuals. Again, I assumed Richard was one of them. Foreign results that were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion were obtained. And Voncile, John, and Donald Hartung could not be included or excluded.
Did you receive swabs from the Swiss Army case?
Yes, I did.
And your results there?
They failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood, and I developed a mixture of at least 3 individuals, again, assuming Richard was one of those. Foreign results that were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion were obtained. And Voncile, John, and Donald Hartung could not be included nor excluded.
And did you receive swabs of blood from the Swiss Army case?
Yes.
And your results there?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Richard Smith.
And when you did a swab of the back corner, blood from the back corner of the case, did you develop a DNA profile there?
Yes.
And your results?
Again, it was a complete DNA profile that matched Richard Smith.
Now, were any of these swabs from the case reworked?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start, what's the first one you reworked?
The swabbing I took of the zippers.
Okay. And your results when you reran it with the new stuff?
I developed a mixture consistent with 2 donors, and then Richard, again, was expected to be a donor. And Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith and Donald Hartung than from Richard Smith and an unrelated individual. The Voncile and John were excluded.
Did you rework the swabs of the outside of the Swiss Army case?
Yes.
And your results there?
I developed a mixture consistent with 3 donors. Again, Richard was expected to be one of those donors. Voncile was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile was greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith and Voncile Smith than from, and one unrelated individual than from Richard Smith and 2 unrelated individuals. Donald Hartung was also included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 590,000 times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith, Donald Hartung, and 1 unrelated individual than from Richard Smith and 2 unrelated individuals. And comparison of the profile to John Smith failed to demonstrate statistical support for inclusion or exclusion.
And did you rework the swabs from the Swiss Army case?
Yes, I did.
And your results there?
It demonstrated demonstrated a mixture. If you assumed 2 contributors to the mixture, which I did because the profile itself looked like 2 people, if you just looked at the graph that comes off, then everybody was excluded. Voncile, John, Donald, and Donald. However, if you compared them manually to the mixture, it didn't look like they should be excluded. So I also ran it through assuming 3 people to the mixture. And when I did that, Voncile was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith, Voncile Smith, and 1 unrelated individual than from Richard Smith and 2 unrelated individuals. Donald Hartung was also included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 21 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith, Donald Hartung, and 1 unrelated individual than from Richard Smith and 2 unrelated individuals. And the comparison to John Smith still failed to demonstrate sufficient statistical support for inclusion or exclusion.
Did you receive swabs from the BlackBerry case in the garbage?
Yes.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And your results from your analysis?
I developed a mixture of at least 2. Again, I was told the BlackBerry phone belonged to Richard, so I assumed Richard was there. And the foreign was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. And Voncile and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
Okay, and when you say you assume Richard, was Richard's DNA there?
Yes.
Did you receive swabs from a webcam?
Yes.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And your DNA analysis?
I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And did you receive swabs from a coffee table?
Yes.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative for blood.
And your DNA analysis there?
I developed a mixture of at least 3. Since it was their coffee table, I assumed that Voncile, Richard, and John were contributors. There was foreign that wasn't interpretable.
All right, did you later receive items from Donald Hartung's house?
Yes.
All right, did you receive brown shoes of Donald Hartung?
Yes.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes.
Your results?
It was negative. There was no indication of blood.
Did you receive a wood handle hammer on top of the from top of the microwave?
I did.
Did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
What about a possible hair from the wooden hammer?
Yes.
And did you do any work on that?
Yes, I examined the hair for suitability to run it through DNA. Hairs have to have a root, and they have to be in a certain phase of growth for me to get DNA out of them, and that phase is like the active growing phase. Normally your hair will switch from the active growing phase to the non-growing phase, and then it just falls out naturally on its own, which is why, you know, you get hair in your hairbrushes and in your bathroom floors. And this particular hair was in that phase, the non-growing phase, where I couldn't obtain the DNA.
Did you receive 2 small area rugs from the bedroom floor?
Yes.
What did you do with those items?
I first tested them for blood. One of the rugs gave chemical indications for the presence of blood, and the other one was inconclusive for the presence of blood. And I divided the rug like in 4 quadrants, and I swabbed each quadrant separately for DNA.
Can you, when you're looking at the blood samples, can you tell the difference in animal blood and human blood?
No.
Okay. When you're testing DNA, can you tell the difference between animal DNA and human DNA?
Animal DNA will not work with our amplification kits that we use. It's higher primate specific.
All right. In the swab of rug 1, what was your DNA analysis?
The first swab I took was a mixture of at least 2. I assumed Donald Hartung was on it because they were his rugs. There was foreign, not interpretable.
And rug 2?
The other swabs I took of rug 1, there was no foreign to Donald Hartung. Rug 2, one of the swabs I took, there was a mixture of at least 2, assuming Donald Hartung. The foreign was not interpretable, and the other swabs were no foreign to Donald Hartung.
Did you receive swabs of suspected blood from the bedroom floor?
Yes.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes.
And your result?
It was negative, so I didn't run DNA.
And what about swabs of suspected blood on the living room floor?
It was negative for the presence of blood, so I didn't run DNA.
And swabs suspected blood from the bathroom toilet lid?
That was again negative for the chemical indications for blood, so I didn't run DNA.
All right, next, where are we at? September 2015 now?
Yes.
Okay. What items did you receive then?
I received swabs from a webcam cord from the garbage can, swabs from the bottom of a sofa cushion, the black belt from Richard Smith, swabs from hangers on Voncile Smith, swabs from hangers on John Smith, swabs from a brown purse from the garbage can, swabs from a black purse in the garbage can, swabs from a green wallet in the garbage can. I received the black purse from the garbage can, a brown purse from the garbage can, and the wallet from the garbage can.
All right, let's start with the swabbing of rug 1 from the bedroom floor. Additional testing.
Oh, let me start with that one, sorry.
Let's start with that
I
one.
jumped ahead. So one of the samples, I went back and concentrated it down further. Essentially, the DNA is in a liquid, and you're only allowed to amplify so much of it at a time. So if you concentrate the DNA down, you get more DNA in the sample, which is what I did to rework it.
And your results?
And my results demonstrated the presence of a mixture of at least 2 individuals. Again, I assumed Donald Hartung was there, and foreign DNA results were obtained. And due to the limited nature of the results, it was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and Richard can neither be included nor excluded. John Smith was excluded.
All right, now swabs from the webcam, cord, and garage. Did you test it for blood?
I did, and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a partial DNA profile developed that matched Voncile.
What about swabs from the bottom of the sofa cushion?
Yes, I developed a mixture of at least 3. And then again, I assumed Voncile, Richard, and John would be on their own sofa cushion. There was foreign to them that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion, and Donald Hartung was excluded.
All right, the black belt from Richard. What did you do with that when you received it?
I noticed that it had red-brown staining on it, so I checked it for the presence of blood, and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I then took a swabbing of the inside, back, and the sides of the belt.
The swabs from the interior of the belt, did you test it for blood?
The swab itself, yes, and it gave chemical indications for presence of blood.
And were you able to develop a DNA profile from the interior of the belt?
Yes.
And what were your results?
I developed a mixture of at least 3, assuming Richard is one of those people since it's his belt. Foreign was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. John and Donald could not be included or excluded. Voncile was excluded.
Now, did you rework the swabs from the interior of the belt?
Yes, I reworked the ones that I took of the belt.
Okay, and your results?
I got a mixture of 2 donors. Again, Richard is an expected donor. Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 1.1 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Richard Smith and Donald Hartung than from Richard Smith and an unrelated individual. And then Voncile and John were excluded from that one.
Now, your swabs from the hangers on Voncile, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was negative for blood.
Did you develop any DNA profile there?
Yes, I developed a mixture of at least 2. I developed a complete major profile that matched Voncile. The minor was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Richard and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
What about the swabs from the hangers on John?
I tested that for blood and it was negative as well. The results were limited, so they were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile, Richard, and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
What about swabs from the brown purse in the garbage?
Yes, I ran the DNA profile and I was told that it was Voncile's purse, so I assumed she was there and there was nothing foreign to Voncile.
What about swabs from the black purse in the kitchen garbage?
That one I had tested for blood and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. It was a mixture of at least 2 developed. I assumed Voncile was one of them, and the foreign was not interpretable.
And swabs from the green wallet in the kitchen garbage?
That one also gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a mixture of at least 2. I assumed Voncile was one of them. The foreign was not interpretable.
Now, you stated that you actually received the black purse from the garbage can?
Yes.
Okay, what did you do with that when you received it?
I noticed that it had red-brown staining on it, so I checked it for blood, and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I then took some different swabbings. I swabbed the inside opening. I swabbed the handle. I swabbed the snap or latch that holds it closed. And I swabbed the suspected blood next to the opening.
All right, let's start with the swab from the inside opening. Was it positive or negative for blood?
It was positive.
And were you able to develop a DNA profile?
Yes. Developed a mixture. Again, I assumed Voncile was there since it was her purse. And there was foreign that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Richard, John, and Donald could not be included or excluded.
Now, when you say assume Voncile, did you see her DNA there?
Yes, her DNA was there.
All right, what about the swabbing from the handle? Did you test that for blood?
Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop a profile there?
Yes, developed a mixture of at least 3. Again, assuming Voncile is one of them. The foreign, major or minor, cannot be determined. Richard and Donald were included as possible contributors. John was excluded.
What about the swabbing from the snap latch? Did you test that for blood?
Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And your analysis?
There's a mixture of at least 2. I developed a complete major profile. That major profile matched Donald Hartung. The minor was not interpretable.
And the swabbing of suspected blood next to the opening?
That gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
Now, any of those swabs that you took, did you rework any of those?
Yes.
Which ones did you rework?
I reworked the swabbing of the inside opening and the swabbing of the handle.
And your results from the inside opening?
I've developed, I got limited foreign to Voncile that was not interpretable.
And the swabbing from the handle?
Again, I had to assume 2 donors and assume 3 donors. Assuming 2 donors, all of them were excluded. Assuming the mixture has 3 donors and that Voncile is a contributor, then Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. And the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if this sample originated from Voncile and Donald and 1 unrelated individual than from Voncile and 2 unrelated individuals.
And that was billion with a B?
Yes, greater than 700 billion. And then Richard and John are in that inconclusive zone. There was no statistical support for inclusion or exclusion.
All right, you stated that you received the actual brown purse from the garbage can.
Yes.
What did you do with that?
I first checked it for the presence of blood, and it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I then took swabbings from the inside opening, swabbing of the zipper, swabbing of the strap, and swabbing of suspected blood near the opening.
All right, let's start with the inside opening. Did you test for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
And your DNA analysis?
I developed a mixture, or assuming 2 people to the mixture, and that Voncile is one of those contributors, I developed a complete foreign that matched Richard.
And the swabbing from the zipper?
That one failed to give chemical indications for blood as well. I developed a mixture of at least 2, assuming Voncile is a contributor. The foreign was not interpretable.
And swabbing from the strap?
That one gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a mixture of at least 3. Assuming Voncile is one of those contributors, I developed a partial foreign major that matched Richard.
And the swabbing of suspected blood next to the opening?
That was just a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And the green wallet from the garbage, what did you do with that?
I first checked it for the presence of blood, which it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I then took a swabbing of suspected blood from the left edge a swabbing of the edges of the outer flaps, swabbing of the internal zipper, swabbing of the internal flap edge, and swabbing of the inside cash pocket opening.
All right, the swab from blood from the edge, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was positive.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
What about the edge of the outer flaps?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a mixture of at least two, assumed Voncile was one of those two. The foreign was not interpretable.
What about the swab of internal zipper?
That gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And the swab of the edge internal flap?
That gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. There's a mixture of at least two. Assuming Voncile is one of them, the foreign was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Richard, John, and Donald could not be included or excluded.
And the swab of the cash pocket opening?
That gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a complete profile that matched Voncile.
All right, next, did you receive swabs from Oakley glasses in the garbage?
Yes.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
What about swabs from black rim glasses in the garbage? Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a complete DNA profile that matched Richard.
Did you receive a piece of floor trim from the garbage?
Yes.
What did you do with that?
I took swabbing of the edges and I did a dry swabbing of the back. That means I didn't wet the swab first because the piece of floor trim was going to eventually be transferred to the latent print section and I didn't want to mess up any of their testing.
All right. The swab of the edges, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you develop a DNA profile?
I got limited data that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. And Voncile, Richard, and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
And what about swabs of the back of it?
I developed limited data that was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile, Richard, and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
And did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you receive swabs from the D-link cord from the den?
Yes.
What were your results there?
I developed limited data. It was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and Richard could not be included or excluded. And John and Donald Hartung were excluded.
Did you receive the actual Oakley glasses from the garbage can?
Yes.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was positive.
Okay. And did you develop DNA profiles off those glasses?
Yes, I took a swabbing of suspected blood from the lens and the earpieces, and I got a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile. And then I took a swabbing of the glasses trying to avoid the red-brown staining or blood, and again, I got a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
The black rim glasses, did you receive those?
Yes.
And what did you do with those?
I took a swabbing for the possible handler, so run the earpieces and rims of it. That failed to give chemical indications for blood, my swabbing, and I got a complete DNA profile that matched Richard.
Did you receive swabs from the left hand of Richard?
Yes.
Did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was positive.
Did you find any foreign DNA to Richard?
No.
Did you receive a swab from his right hand?
Yes.
Test it for blood?
Yes, it was positive.
And did you receive or locate any foreign DNA of Richard's?
No, there's nothing foreign to Richard.
Did you receive the red shirt and white shirt from Richard?
Yes.
What'd you do with those?
The white shirt I didn't do anything with because it was underneath the red shirt, and I was going to look for possible people that touched the red shirt. So the red shirt, I actually took a swabbing of the possible knife marks because it appeared somebody had wiped a knife off onto the shirt. I took a swabbing of the bottom left side of the shirt, trying to avoid the suspected blood, the swabbing of the bottom back of the shirt, swabbing from directly below the possible knife marks, and swabbing from above the knife marks in the back of the left sleeve.
Now, the swab of the what looked like knife marks on the shirt, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was positive.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, a complete DNA profile that matched Richard.
What about the swab on the bottom left side of his shirt?
That one was phenonegative, or I'm sorry, failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood, and there was a mixture of at least 2. I assumed Richard, of course, it was his shirt. The foreign was not interpretable.
What about the swab of the bottom back left of the red shirt?
That one failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood, and there was nothing foreign to Richard.
What about the swab below the knife mark on the red shirt?
That one did give chemical indications for the presence of blood, but there was nothing foreign to Richard.
And the swab above?
That one gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. I developed a mixture of at least 2. I assumed Richard was one of them. The foreign was not interpretable.
Did you receive a swab of the right hand of Voncile?
Yes,
And did it test positive for blood?
yes.
What was anything foreign DNA found?
There was, but it was not interpretable. It was very limited.
What about the left hand of Voncile?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood, but there was nothing foreign to Voncile.
What about the left hand of John?
It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. Overall, it was just limited DNA results that were not interpretable.
And the right hand of John?
That one actually was negative, or failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood. There were DNA results foreign to John obtained that were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and Richard could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
What about, did you receive any swabs from the chest in the den?
Yes,
And did you test that for blood?
yes, it was negative.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
I developed a partial DNA profile that matched Richard.
Did you receive Richard's checkbook and papers from Swiss Army case?
Yes.
And what did you do with those items?
I divided them up and swabbed different areas. So I swabbed the outside of the checkbook. I took a dry swabbing of the top check, which was check number 4007. I took a swabbing of the card holder inside the checkbook. I took a swabbing of the cards and papers. And I took a swabbing of the First Union Bank card.
All right, let's start with the swab of the outside of the checkbook. Did you check that for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, I developed a mixture, but assuming Richard is one of the contributors to that mixture because it was his checkbook, I developed a complete foreign DNA profile that matched Donald Hartung.
What about the swab of the top check?
I developed a mixture again, assuming Richard is one of those. The foreign was insufficient for inclusion, but suitable for exclusion, and all the other people were excluded.
And the swab of the card holder inside the checkbook?
Again, I developed a mixture, assuming Richard is one of them. The foreign was not interpretable.
And the swab of the cards and the papers?
I developed a mixture, assuming Richard is one of them. Foreign DNA results were insufficient for inclusion, but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
What about Richard's First Union Bank card? What'd you do with that?
I developed a mixture, again, assuming Richard is one of those contributors. There was a foreign that was not interpretable.
And now you actually received swabs from Richard's checkbook too, didn't you?
Yes,
And did you test that for blood?
yes, it was negative.
And did you develop DNA profile there?
Yes, I did.
What's your results?
I developed a mixture, assuming Richard, a complete foreign DNA profile is obtained, and that foreign DNA profile matches Donald Hartung.
Did you receive paper towels from the garbage can?
Yes,
How many?
there were 5 towels and napkins that had a lot of suspected blood on them.
And just to back up a little bit on the Swiss Army checkbook, when you say a major profile, does that mean the last to touch, or does that mean, what can you tell us about a major profile?
Donald was the major, meaning there was more of Donald's DNA on the checkbook than Richard's, or what the profile that matched Donald was higher. Those markers were higher than Richard's markers. And usually the major is either the person that touched it the most or the person that touched it last.
All right, moving to the paper towels in the garbage. What did you do with those 5 towels?
Most of them I took 2 samples from each towel. I took a sample of the suspected blood that gave chemical indications for blood, and then I tried to take a swabbing around it to avoid the suspected blood for handler. One of the towels was completely covered in blood, and I could only take a blood sample.
All right. For all of these towels, did you develop the same DNA profile?
Voncile was the major on all of them, or the only person that on them.
And did you test all of those for blood?
Yes, they were all positive or gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
Did you receive paper towels from the garbage can?
Yes, I did.
And did you test those?
Yeah, these had more orange-brown staining as opposed to blood. They looked more like food. They were negative for the chemical indications for blood across all of them, so I didn't run DNA.
Did you receive miscellaneous cards and personal items from the garbage can?
Yes.
What did you do with those?
I took a swabbing of there was a small plastic bag with a battery and a white piece of paper. And then I took a swabbing of the suspected blood from the piece of paper.
All right, the plastic bag with battery and white paper, did you test that for blood?
Yes, that was negative.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Well, maybe I should clarify. I swabbed the paper around the red-brown staining. That was negative, the swabbing. The DNA profile, I developed a mixture, assuming 2, major and minor were not determined. Voncile and Richard are included as possible contributors. John and Donald Hartung were excluded.
And the swab of suspected blood from the white paper?
That, I developed a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And was that positive for blood?
Yes, that was positive for blood.
All right, the swab from cards and personal items. Did you test that for blood?
Yes, that failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood.
Did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a mixture of at least 3. I developed a complete major DNA profile that matched Voncile. The minor was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Richard and John could not be included or excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
Did you receive cigarette butts from the black garbage can?
Yes,
How many?
there were 5.
When you got those 5, what did you do with them?
I took cuttings from the filter ends of the cigarettes for DNA. I also checked them for the presence of blood.
All right, let's start with, did you relabel them by letter?
Yes, so the actual evidence would have a little letter written on it that I did in Sharpie.
All right, cigarette A, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a complete DNA profile that matched Donald Hartung.
Cigarette B, did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a complete DNA profile that matched Donald Hartung.
Cigarette C, did you test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Develop a DNA profile?
Yes, actually developed a mixture of at least 2. Developed a complete major that matched Donald Hartung. The minor was not interpretable.
Cigarette D, test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Develop a DNA profile?
Yes, there was a complete DNA profile that matched Donald Hartung.
And cigarette E, did you test that for blood?
Yes, it was positive. It gave chemical indications for the presence of blood. And I developed a mixture, assuming 2 donors to the mixture. I developed a partial major, which matched Donald Hartung, and a partial minor, which matched Voncile.
Based on your examination of cigarette E, the minor you said matches Voncile,
Yes,
could that be the levels or the numbers you're looking at? Could that be transferred from her blood in the garbage can?
she's definitely more minor, so it's possible.
The profiles you indicated matching Donald Hartung on the cigarettes, could those be transferred?
It's much more likely that he smoked the cigarettes, given the large amount of his DNA on them.
Did you rework any of those cigarette swabs?
I did the last one that gave chemical indications for the presence of blood.
And when you reworked it, what were your results?
Again, I got a mixture of two. Voncile was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Voncile in one unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals. And Donald Hartung was included as a possible contributor. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Donald Hartung in one unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals.
Did you receive a knife from a guest bedroom?
Yes.
Test it for blood?
Yes, it was negative.
Did you receive a white box with suspected blood from John's room?
Yes.
And what did you do with that when you received it?
I took a swabbing of the suspected blood, and I took a swabbing of the box trying to avoid the suspected blood for handler.
All right, your swabbing of the suspected blood, did it in fact test positive for blood?
Yes, it did.
And did you develop a DNA profile?
Yes, a complete DNA profile that matched Voncile.
And the swab of the actual white box?
That failed to give chemical indications for the presence of blood.
Did you develop any DNA profile?
I developed limited DNA results that were insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile and John could not be included nor excluded. Richard and Donald were excluded.
Did you receive mail in a Kleenex pack from the Swiss Army case?
Yes.
Did you develop a DNA profile there?
I took a dry swabbing from the envelopes in the tissue package. And due to the complexity of the mixture, the data was insufficient for inclusion but suitable for exclusion. Voncile, Richard, and John could not be included nor excluded. Donald Hartung was excluded.
Did you receive check number 4006 for $1,000?
Yes.
And did you develop a DNA profile off of that?
I took a dry swabbing of just the envelope. The check was going to go to our document section, and I wasn't allowed to examine it. And I got no DNA results off the envelope.
All right. To kind of put into context for the jury your statistics, are you familiar with the current population of the Earth?
It's about 7.5 billion.
How many items total in this case did you receive or examine?
I received 67 separate containers. And then, of course, I took multiple swabs from some of those items. So I ran originally over 115 items through DNA. And then I reworked 17 of them, counting their standards.
How did you go about deciding which items to rework with the new stuff?
The items that reworked were based on the original results. I picked items that were either had very low statistics the first time around, or the person could not be included or excluded, in hoping to give a better result for those particular items. And items like where they were excluded before, they would still be excluded. There wasn't a point in running them again.
All right, and Ms. Wilkerson, I think I cut you off at the beginning, but you have your pointer there. Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at in red?
Yes. So this was the chart from earlier of the hammer handle swab that I took. So I kind of color coded this to make it easier for you to read. I put all of Donald Hartung's profile in red so that you can see his markers easier, and then the markers with boxes around them. So like here, the 32.2. only he has the 32.2. So Voncile, Richard, and John could not have given that 32.2 to that mixture, but Donald could have. So if you look down each marker, even though they're related, you can see that Donald Hartung has different markers from his two half-brothers and his mother as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Are you able to tell, looking at John, Richard, and Donald Hartung's DNA, that they have different fathers?
There would have to be two fathers among the three boys. From looking at them, I couldn't tell you which two, but because of if you take their mother, who is obviously Voncile from their DNA, and back her out of the boys' profiles, then there's three options at multiple markers for the father. So the father would have had to have three markers at multiple places, which can't happen. You only can get one from your mother and one from your father, so he could only have two. So there has to be at least two men that fathered the three boys.
Okay, so you're given enough information when you're looking at these DNA, the alleles, the allele chart, you're given enough information to where you can decipher, even though they're related, that this is Donald Hartung, this is Richard Smith, this is John Smith.
Yes, I mean, they each have 7 to 9 or 10 markers that are individual to them that they don't share with their brother or their mother. So you can tell them apart, especially when it's a single profile. The problem gets when they start mixing together. So then you end up with more options in the mixture that it could make somebody look like they're there.
And there's no indication based on your data and your analysis that there's any identical twins there?
No, the John, Richard, and Donald are definitely not identical twins.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all, Your Honor.
Before we start, Judge, can we have a short break?
Yes, we'll take a 10-minute break. Be back at 11:15.